let's talk about Tombow's dual brush pens. These were invented in the 1980s and they have two tips. So one side is a brush tip and the other side is a bullet tip, which can be fun for drawing, but I mostly use the brush tip for like coloring and applying color and blending. So this is my go-to. Feel free to use whatever colors speak to you, whatever marker colors that you have in your stash. Really quick though, I do want to talk about the color numbers on these markers, just in case you were curious. I love color theory, so I love learning little facts like this. So let me explain what these numbers mean. Each marker has a 3-digit number that indicates like the hue and the value of the color. The first 2 digits are the hue, so that basically means the color of the marker. And if you have a range of these markers, you'll kind of be able to see the color codes on them. So generally like 0s to 10s are yellows, so this is 05. 10 to 20s would be yellow greens, this one is 12, and so on and so on. So obviously you'll have a lot of purple starting with the same 2 numbers, 6, 8, ranges from 5 to 6 in the blues, and starting with 8s in the reds. And the third number on each marker indicates the value of each color, so ranging from light to dark, with a 0 being the lightest and 9 being the darkest. So for example, 131, the 1-3 is the hue, so that light yellow-green color, and then the 1 is how light it is. So this is a very light marker compared to 5 to 8, which ends in an 8, and it's a much darker marker than that one. So that indicates the hue and then the value. So it's just a fun fact to know, especially when you're picking colors. If you want a range of colors that are in a similar value, you can just go off the color designation and pick ones that end in the same number. So these both end in 5. They're going to be fairly similar if you were to swatch them out in the same value. Now these designations do change a little bit in the gray toned and black markers. All of these markers will start with an N for neutral, and that's followed by 2 numbers. The first number is going to be the value, but it's opposite of the color. So the color was light to dark, 0 being the lightest, 9 being the darkest. With the neutral gray black markers, 1 will be the darkest, and then it will go up, 9 would be the lightest. So this is the black marker, and it's 1 because it's dark. The second number on the marker is the temperature of the gray, so from cool to warm, with 1 being the coolest and 9 being the warmest. So this is a 9. So this is a 9, and it's going to be the warmest gray marker that I've got. Okay, we'll get to sketching now. I just thought color facts are really cool, so I hope you enjoyed learning about that with me. Okay, first let's talk supplies. So you're going to need a mixed media or watercolor paper. I like Canson's mixed media paper if I'm just practicing, swatching, or playing around. It is 98 pounds, so it's heavyweight enough that I can do some water techniques with it, and it's still affordable. However, when I'm creating finished works of art, I like to switch over to their 140-pound watercolor paper because it's got a heavier weight to it, so it holds up better. And my sketchbook is actually a handbook journal by Speedball, so it's got 140-pound watercolor paper in it as well, and I'll be working in that later. But first up, you just need some watercolor or mixed media paper, as well as Tombow Dual Brush Pens. I will be showing you how to blend the dual brush pens using just the markers, the colorless blending marker, and as well as water. So you'll either need a water brush or a jar of water and a paintbrush. The first method we are going to talk about is direct, so that means direct to paper. So to blend colors together directly on the paper, you just apply one color, and you can do it as a shape or a rectangle, whatever you want. I'm going to do a rectangle just for the purposes of showing you how to blend these colors. I'm using 743, and then you take a second color, 379, or whatever colors you want to use. It doesn't have to match mine exactly, and apply it on only part of the blend that you just did. And then you're going to go back in with your first color, which I like to start with my lighter color. So start with your lightest color, apply your darker color, and then get your lighter color again. And you can push that ink back towards the light end. And you'll see that it does start to fade, get a little muddy. You can keep going, but because you've got the dark color on your marker tip, you want to get that off. So you can just scribble on a scrap piece of paper or on the side of your swatch paper here until your ink starts running to the original color again. And then keep on pushing that color down the line. And you can go in the other direction as well. Push it back in the opposite direction. I like to sort of mix the two directions. That way it's a nice smooth blend. So I'll do that again. I'm using 158 this time, a nice green color. And I'm just going to apply it this way. You don't even have to go all the way to the end if you don't want to. And then I'll use 379 again. It's a nice deep teal color. And then instead of using the lighter color again, you can actually go in with the colorless blending marker. And this is not an empty dual brush pen, it's actually got a clear dual brush pen ink in it. So you can just basically do the same thing and it moves that ink around a little bit. And just make sure that you kind of clean off the tip in between passes. For the indirect blending method, you're going to want either a blending palette. Tombow makes these and it's just like a laminated palette that makes it very handy for this technique. Or you can use any like marker packaging that you have, anything that's like non-porous like this. And for this technique, you are going to apply your dual brush pen ink directly to the blending palette instead of the paper. So it's indirect because you're going palette and then paper. And then you can pick the color up with the colorless blending pen. Apply that to the paper. And this can offer smoother blends, however, they're usually less vibrant than the direct paper method. So once you've gotten your first color down onto the paper, you will apply your second, usually darker color, to the blending palette, and then pick that color up with the colorless blender, and then just do it in the opposite direction, very similarly how we did the direct to paper. However, we're just doing it indirect, so you want to use the blending marker. And again, don't forget to just clean the tip of your blending marker off on a piece of scrap paper on the side of your paper once in a while. And it is okay if the tip gets stained a little bit, it will stain. As long as you can scribble it off on a piece of scrap paper and the ink starts running clear again, you're good to go. You can keep on using it. Next we have two-tone, which is similar to indirect. However, instead of using the blending marker, you will use two dual brush pen colors. So you have two options here. You can either color one color directly onto the blending palette and do exactly like we just did with the indirect. However, you pick up the color with your second dual brush pen. So I'm just picking up all of that teal color on my pink dual brush pen, kind of turning it around so it gets all over. And then we're going to start on one side and just begin applying the ink. And the more you go, the more it'll start to fade. I applied a lot on this marker, so sometimes you do want to just scribble a little bit off, but the more that you use the marker, the more that second color will fade off of the tip, and then it will go back to its original color. Just make sure that when you are done blending, you just give your marker a little scribble just to make sure it's all clean again. This does not hurt the marker tips at all. Even if they end up a little bit stained, like as long as the ink is running clear, you're good to go. So the second way that you can do two-tone markers, and similar, is you take your two colors, but you use the darker color and you actually just kind of scribble it on the tip of the first marker and then do the same thing. So we'll start on one end And as you go, it's going to blend back down to the original color. I'll demonstrate that one more time with these lighter colors so that you can see it pretty good. So I'll apply the pink directly onto the yellow and then just start scribbling. And that is a nice, easy way to get a very subtle blend. And now we have my personal favorite technique, which is using water, so it kind of turns them into watercolors. So these are water-based markers. So there are a couple of ways that you can do this as well. You can do it the direct to paper, where you just start by applying one color, apply the second color on here. However, then instead of blending it with a dual brush pen or the colorless blender, you're going to take a wet paintbrush, not too wet, just a little bit, and blend the two colors together. You just want to start on one end. I usually like to start in the lighter color and then push that color back towards the other end. And you do want to kind of wash your paintbrush off, dab it on a paper towel in between passes so that you're not getting too much of a muddy color back into your light color. And because they're water-based, they do react to water, so you can just move that ink around. This method does only work on a heavier weight paper, so mixed media or watercolor paper. It won't work if you're just using marker paper or any sort of copy paper. I love this technique because I personally love how watercolor looks, so I love the slight variations, the imperfections, and like little color blooms that you can get by using water. I think just the slight variations you can get add a lot of interest to your blends. You can also do this the indirect method, so you would apply your color directly to the blending palette and then you'll pick it up and apply it here. So you take a wet paintbrush, pick up that pigment, and then just apply the ink as if it were watercolors. Basically, you're turning the marker into watercolor paint. You just pick it up and apply it to the paper. And you can pick up your second color. You can even mix them, so you could take this pink, mix it into this yellow, and instead of blending the two colors on the paper, you just blend it on the palette. And this can offer some really softer colors and really soft blends, a lot like the indirect method. Next, I thought it might be fun just to share with you how I would sort of use these techniques if I were like coloring in some of my drawings. So I've just got some simple line drawings here that I thought I would color in with my dual brush pens. So I drew these with Tombow's Mono drawing pens. So they're just like your normal black fine liners. They're really great. They don't smudge or anything. They dry pretty fast. So I'm good to just use dual brush pens directly on top of these. So for this mushroom, I'm going to be using the direct to paper method, however, using water to blend it. So I'm just starting off with a nice light pink color, and then I'm going to add in a couple different shades. So that was 772, this is 885, and I'm just going to color them directly onto the paper. And because this is a 140-pound watercolor paper sketchbook, I have time to work with them. I found that the heavier weight your paper is, the more time that you kind of have to work and blend the colors. If you have a very lightweight paper, the marker kind of dries a lot faster, so you have less time to work with them. But with this 140-pound watercolor paper, I can take my time adding a few layers and then I'll still be able to blend them with water. Then I'm just going to take a wet paintbrush and I'm going to start in the lighter areas and just kind of use it to kind of making circular motions, blending it down into those darker colors. And I am not a perfectionist in my art by any means, so while I did my best to avoid the little white toppings on the mushroom, I'm not going to cry if I get a little bit of color in them. I can always just touch it up with a white gel pen. You can always add layers as well. Just make sure that the first layer is dry before you go back in with the second layer, especially if you used water to blend it like I did. One thing I love about markers is that you can just kind of change up the techniques. You can blend them for very soft watercolor looks. But then you can also use the brush tip of the marker itself to get like really cool textures, different dots. Just add in different brush strokes and layer them, and I just think it's a really versatile medium, and there's a lot that you can do with them. Now for the sunflower, I thought I would color it using the dual brush pens directly to paper, and then also maybe using the colorless blender marker, maybe the blending palette. We'll see how it goes. But I'm just starting with my lightest yellow and adding a few lighter shades in here, mostly just the tips of the petals. And then I'm going to switch to a slightly darker shade and color in the bottom of those petals. And then I think even one shade darker. And I'm going to just add it in here and there at the bottom. Then I'm going to use my N00 Colorless Blending Marker and blend that ink around a little bit, kind of smooth out those marker lines. And I'm just kind of starting at the dark end and pulling that color out towards the lighter end of the petals. This is kind of cool because let's say you made an oopsie, like you got some dark ink there where you didn't want it to be. You can take your colorless blender and just kind of start at the light side and just push that ink back out of the lighter area and back into the place where it belongs, and you've just kind of erased it. So I do think that's a really neat feature of the colorless blender marker. Next, I'm going to use that same dark yellow to make a nice base for the center so that it has the same tone as the darker shades of the flower. And then add in a few darker shades of brown gray and darkening that up even more. And I just thought this could use a little bit more texture to the sunflower center, so I'm using the bullet tip of a dual brush pen just to add some dots and texture into the center of the flower. And if you want to add any white highlights to your piece, you can take any white gel pen that you have. This is my favorite. It is a Uniball Signo, just white gel pen. And you can just use it to add some white highlights or texture to your piece. I like to use it to add more dots to the sunflower and just more visual texture. And lastly, for the fern, I thought I would do the indirect method, which if you remember means that we apply the dual brush pen ink to a different surface first. So I'm going to apply some directly to the blending palette and then pick it up, put it on the paper.